Hello, we hope that we are live right now. This is Arizonans for Transparency and Accountability in Corrections. I am John Fabricius, the Executive Director of ATAC. We apologize, we had some technical difficulties, so we're running a little bit late, but we will get to all of the content and issues that we were going to discuss tonight. I am extraordinarily privileged to have this panel with us today, this exceptional panel. And so let me first and foremost go around and make some introductions. I will start with Jimmy Jenkins, who is familiar to many Arizonans, especially many of those who have been looking at the Arizona Department of Corrections for the last several years. Jimmy is the incredible reporter for the Arizona Republic and formerly of KJZZ, who has done all of the extensive prison reporting over the last 5 years, without which we would not have many of the facts and information that we have. So in no small part, Jimmy Jenkins is the reason that we have so much information regarding the Department of Corrections. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Jimmy. We also have Julie Gunnigle. Julie Gunnigle, as many people here in Maricopa County know, ran for the Maricopa County Attorney's Office in 2020. She is an attorney and former prosecutor in Elkhart, Indiana, and in Chicago, Illinois, a native of Arizona, and a former law professor. And we're extraordinarily happy to have Julie with us today. Thank you so much for joining us today, Julie. Also, we have Stacy Scheff. Stacy Scheff is an attorney, civil rights attorney down in Tucson, who does an incredible amount of work specifically with the Department of Corrections and on prisoner civil rights cases related to the Department of Corrections, and has brought a whole new method to representing inmates down there that is novel and is bringing legal counsel to many of the people that could never even access it before to vindicate their rights in the Department of Corrections. Stacy, we are deeply grateful for you to join us. And along with Stacy, also from the same law firm, is Billy Peard. Billy Peard, also a civil rights attorney who's lived in several states in the country and has done a great amount of work in a number of areas, formerly with the ACLU, and working on prisoner civil rights cases presently as well, and doing this incredible work, bringing that legal access to those peoples that can't vindicate their rights. So Billy, thank you also so much for coming out and joining us this evening. So we do have this incredible panel. What I want to do is do just a quick review of why we are here and what we're talking about today. So we are in a position where we have a historic trial going on in downtown Phoenix in the United States District Court. It is a remarkable trial because this is a class action lawsuit that was filed on behalf of the roughly 27,000, 30,000 inmates in the Department of Corrections who are housed in the state facilities, and that is something that this lawsuit does not reach into the private facilities where Arizona inmates are additionally housed. This would only apply to the state of Arizona facilities, the 10 complexes throughout the state. This lawsuit was filed I think 2010 or 2011 regarding a number of issues related to the provision of health care in the Department of Corrections, the provision of mental health care in the Department of Corrections, the provision of dental care in the Department of Corrections, and the what is phrased as the excessive use of isolation and segregation of inmates in isolated cells, and a number of issues that are related to that, also related to mental health issues and those things that come secondary from those isolation periods. This lawsuit was entered into a settlement I think in 2014, and we'll fact check with Jimmy. I know Jimmy's got a lot of these dates locked in his mind. On about 2014, the state and the plaintiff class did enter into a settlement agreement that was approved by the court, and the court maintained monitoring of that settlement agreement. And for a number of years, within that settlement agreement, that gave the plaintiff attorneys, which are represented by the ACLU, the Prison Law Office, the Arizona Centers for Disabilities. It gave those attorneys the ability to go in and to tour the facilities, to take pictures inside the facilities, to speak to inmates, to speak to staff, to find out exactly what is going on in the Department of Corrections. And through that period, they were also charged with making sure that their clients were being served by this settlement agreement that was entered into, meaning that they also had to monitor those conditions and the state's compliance with the terms of that settlement pleading. That ended up in a lot of litigation in the period of 2014 through this year, where the court, two distinct judges with the United States District Court, both found at times that the Arizona Department of Corrections was non-compliant with that settlement agreement and ordered massive contempt sanctions. The court gave the Department of Corrections years to comply and gave them a number of prompts and a number of opportunities to correct their mistakes, which the court finally determined, the judge that's sitting on the case now finally determined that they had not met those terms. And the court took the historic and remarkably unique decision to remove that settlement agreement and set this class action for trial. And that's where we have landed now. We are in what is scheduled to be a 3-week trial. We have just concluded the first week of that trial, and it's down at the United States District Court with Judge Rosalind Silver. And so we've had 5 full days of the trial, and we're going to talk about what's been going on down there this week and what we think that the impact of what's been going on down there. We're going to kind of explain some of the legal machinations that may be a little bit difficult to understand if you've been watching, attending, or listening to the trials, and we're going to kind of get into assessing how we think some of the evidence may or may not land as the trial moves forward. So I think that we'd like to begin with Jimmy. If you could do a quick summary of this week, what's been going on down there in the trial.
Sure. So we just heard from a lot of witnesses from the plaintiffs. We've heard from incarcerated people. We've heard the testimony of deputy wardens who work for the Department of Corrections. We've heard from people who work for Centurion. So, getting a lot of different perspectives. It's my understanding, and for those maybe who are not sure like why the order of things are happening, I think the plaintiffs are trying to lay out their case in a specific order, but everything is just so hard to pin down. I think they're definitely having trouble scheduling incarcerated people and getting everything to line up. So it's kind of like things have really changed. So it's just like we're getting random information from all over, but it is kind of fascinating to get the different viewpoints. So we started the week, I think, actually with the most compelling testimony that was offered, and this was an incarcerated woman named Kendall Johnson, who was testifying, from a wheelchair in a medical unit at the Perryville prison. And, I will never forget this for the rest of my life. It was just so moving. And she was just basically talking about how she was a healthy person when she entered prison. Many years later, she started experiencing the symptoms in her legs of numbness and some pain, had trouble walking. In any other case in the free world, you would just go to your doctor and say, "Hey, I'm experiencing numbness in my legs and my feet. What's going on?" And the diagnosis that she got years later probably would have been, clearly given right away, and she could have received treatment. But anyway, years passed. She was finally diagnosed with MS, and then another year passed until she was able to get treatment. So we're hearing from this woman who is nearly immobile. And for me, it was just listening to her struggle to speak, to express the wrongs that had been done to her. It's just really powerful, really moving, really brave of her. She said that, you know, the people, she's basically saying, hey, in front of the people who are caring for her, hey, I'm not getting very good care here. So it's, it's already very difficult and challenging for an incarcerated person to take the risk of testifying in any trial. This is a person who's, has to be fed and taken care of by the people in the medical center. And she's essentially going to federal court here and saying that, I'm being treated poorly and these people are to blame. So just really stunning all the way around, very courageous. And so that's how it started. So, I mean, it was just like, wow, right out of the gate, we hear this story, and that kind of set the tone. Um, we also heard from several different people who have been talking about staffing. One of those was Robert Joy. He did this analysis where he basically said, okay, we're not going to look at like how much Centurion thinks we need or how much the department thinks we need. I'm going to look at the patients first, and I'm going to find out, okay, I've got like this many people with severe cancer. I've got this many people, and he started putting them into different cohorts. And then he figures out, okay, if this is the need, the true need, then what is the need for responding to that? And he put together a plan and basically says, this is how many people you need to staff in which positions to run things appropriately. There was some disagreement about, the numbers that he used, whether or not he was experienced enough to be looking at prisons. When one side puts up a witness, the other side is always going to try to impeach them and kind of tear them down a little bit. So those were some of the lines of attack against what he was saying. One of them, another thing that even the judge asked was like, well, why didn't you look at the current usage numbers? Like, why didn't you look at what people are saying, the treatment that they need right now, to factor that in? And he basically said, I don't think we can trust that because, number one, we know it's very difficult for incarcerated people to get treatment in Arizona prisons. You have to put in like a $4 or $5 request just to be seen. They have copays. And even then it never gets through. They never get anything approved, So he's just saying like, you can't look at what the apparent supposed need is because you're not addressing the needs, in my opinion, right now. So that's a bad way. So that was kind of an interesting way, and a way that I've never heard of someone look at a mental health care staffing model before. Normally they do it the other way. They look at like, okay, you've got this X amount of requests and this is how we're going to fill them. Let's see, moving on, heard from a couple other different people who talked about staffing. But I wanted to talk about Laura Redmond, another incarcerated person. This kind of, to me, was just a real tragic thing to watch, but it kind of exemplifies like what the plaintiffs are saying. So Ms. Redmond is a deaf person who, she says in her own words, profoundly deaf. She's at the Perryville prison. She's telling attorneys that she can't get the things that she needs, one of which being she would like to get a cochlear implant, because in her healthcare appointments, she's provided no interpreter. And so when she's talking about these very complex medical issues with the healthcare staff, they're writing things down. She's trying to read their lips. I mean, it's just, and she's at like the audiologist of it's like of all the people that you think would understand why this would be important anyway. So she is testifying to tell that story, but her testimony was pushed back because the prisons and the courts could not line up a sign language interpreter for her to testify. So it was just like before she even spoke, it made the point that here we have someone who is struggling with this disability and they're just getting no support. And this was just another tragic example of that breakdown. So finally, they did get someone on the line. They had two interpreters. the screen kept freezing. This kind of ties into another thing that the plaintiffs had asked for, that they wanted the incarcerated people to be testifying in person. But I think Judge Silver, for various reasons, said, we're not going to do that. We're going to try remote. And it's been going okay, but this was an example of something that she's gone through. She says time and time again, in that, I need someone to be able to communicate my medical needs for me, or else they're never going to get met. And so just another example of some of the testimony that we heard this week. Do you have anything else you wanted me to speak to specifically, John?
Well, what happened on the rest of the days? What were the rest of the witnesses that we had this week, Jimmy? Just in summary.
Okay, sure. I don't want to take up too much time.
Sure.
But so we also heard from Ronald Slavin, witness for the plaintiffs. He's incarcerated at Iman, seriously mentally ill. Said he started hearing voices when he was a young person. He basically wanted to get transferred to a yard full of people who suffer from the same mental illnesses as him, but they have found that these people can all have access to the same kind of counseling and group therapy, and it really works. And he said that he had actually been there before and it really worked. He's essentially asking over and over again, can I please be transferred to one of these units? Because where he was currently, he's not getting anything. And he talked about how his counselor suggested that maybe he should listen to a podcast. And this is a man who's saying, like, I have severe delusions. I'm hearing auditory hallucinations. I need help with a litany of things. And, it's kind of like the answer was like, oh, well, let's listen to this podcast, or let's do some coloring books. It's just not up to what any of us would hope we would have access to, were we in that kind of a situation. And unfortunately, many of the incarcerated people were talking about suffering from the same symptoms. So we heard from another incarcerated person named Rahim Muhammad, who is severely mentally ill. This was another really sad case. He was remotely testifying from the Iman prison, I believe. And he actually testified about how he is severely delusional. He has all kinds of voices in his head telling him to do things. One of them is to hurt himself. And so he commits acts of self-harm. And we saw some screenshots of this, and then we were actually showed the video of this. Essentially, it's very graphic for people out there watching, but he was banging his head into the cell wall, the cell door, because he thought a voice was telling him to do so in order to protect his family member. So just severe delusions going on. This is the kind of level of seriously mentally ill we're talking about. The department's response to this several times, more than 40 times by his testimony, he was sprayed with pepper spray. And then we actually saw the video. They'll say, if you don't stop hitting your head against the wall, we're going to spray you with pepper spray. And so it's very dramatic, very graphic. At another time, he was actually shot with pepper balls at very close range. And, the point that I think plaintiffs are trying to make here is the first response obviously should be from someone from mental health to try and come and de-escalate the situation. You shouldn't be sending in, special operation units to do a cell extraction right away. And this is the kind of damage that it can end up happening. Another really big witness we heard from Craig Haney, who was, he's a famous psychologist who has studied prisons extensively and the impact prisons have on people. And this all started because when he was a graduate student, he was actually the lead researcher on the Stanford prison experiment. So really fascinating career and life and perspective that he's had. And I have also talked with him extensively outside of court and asked him more about, his life, and it's all out there if people want to look him up, but a lot of interesting work that he's been a part of. He was basically one of the people that the plaintiffs are relying on to go in, conduct interviews, especially to talk about isolation. And this is another big theme that we heard all week. Mr. Haney talked to many different people who are incarcerated, who are being held either in solitary confinement or an isolation cell. And, essentially the takeaways were he actually visited Arizona prisons in 2013. Then he came back in 2021 and he told the court, nothing has changed. It's really terrible. He said, we are one of the systems one of the most severe systems in the country when it comes to use of solitary confinement. He talked about the damage, the mental damage that it does to people. He said incarcerated people or seriously mentally ill people are especially at risk from the factors that prison can have on one's mind. He talked about how the people that he talked to said they're seriously mentally ill, they need help, but instead a healthcare provider, a mental health care provider is walking by the cell and asking for a thumbs up, and that's their counseling session for the month. So he just gave a whole lot of examples of the impacts of solitary confinement on people's mental health, how Arizona relies upon it extensively, and the overall damage that it does.
I believe, Jimmy, at one point he testified that Arizona on a continuum is in the worst states. He couldn't say that Arizona was the worst, but it was in the worst. And then he didn't want to be nailed down to any specific space on that continuum, but he said it's certainly within the five worst prison systems that he's ever gone through. And he's been doing this for 40 years, since the early 70s, right?
Yeah, and he said he's been to 25 different states, probably been in more than 30 different facilities. So yeah, this is someone who, he's an expert in this field, and he said he didn't want to split hairs, but when you compare all the prison systems in the United States, he said we were among the worst.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Jimmy. That's incredible, and it's a lot of information. You're absolutely right, and and I think that underscores, just in your recitation of the events this week, underscores what you were talking about in preliminary, which was that it doesn't seem like it's cohesive from witness to witness, that they're having to put on witnesses kind of in this disparate manner, a lot of times to make time for when the Department of Corrections actually produces some of the other fact witnesses, the men and women that are incarcerated in the Department of Corrections, and facilitating that. So that was another thing too, is that it's not a cohesive thread of testimony. These things might be interrupted and coming back and all that. And we'll circle back and talk about that, because this is a bench trial. Did you have something on that, Jimmy?
No, I was just going to say, yeah, it's like, normally I think an attorney's team is putting together a narrative for a jury, but there was no opening statement. There's going to be no closing statement. That was all submitted by paperwork, and Judge Silver, I think they're just trying to pull out things to emphasize for her. So yeah, it's a little different presentation than most of us are used to seeing, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Julie, let me go to you now. Let's talk about someone's sent to prison, they break a crime and they get sent to prison. What rights? Where does the right to have medical care, or to not be put into a cell and be shot with pepper sprays if you suffer from severe mental illness, where does that stem from in the United States?
I mean, that's a really great question, John, because you're not going to see a right not to be pepper sprayed, at least on the Bill of Rights. It gets lumped into this Eighth Amendment claim, right, where we talk about what cruel and unusual punishment looks like. And we get to that place because of 1983, right? That's the law that this is actually brought under, where you have to have a deprivation, not a state right, a federal right. And for those watching at home, you might be listening and thinking, wow, this sounds horrific. This sounds cruel. This sounds potentially unusual amongst the 50 states. But that's still not enough to be successful on that claim. And I'll just tell you real quick, like, that's one of the issues with these sorts of cases, right? That you have to make that additional showing. It has to be deliberate indifference. And that can be a difficult thing to prove, even with facts as horrific as these, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. And Stacy, let me go to you. So you're in the business of making those deliberate indifference claims to the court when you have clients that are bringing forth these type of issues. Can you talk about that? Can you talk about the difficulty and what the deliberate indifference standard is, and what it means to have to prove that in court?
Sure. Most people are probably more familiar with the standard called medical malpractice, which is a negligence standard. So negligence can be just a mistake. Like if you're hit by a car, You don't have to show that they meant to hurt you. You just have to show that they had a duty not to hurt you and that they failed in that duty. It could have been distraction. It could have been a whole number of things. But when it comes to deliberate indifference, you have to show an element of intent to harm. And so I break it down this way, that you have to show 4 basic elements. The first is that the authorities had notice of a threat to your health or safety. The second is that they had the power to do something about it. And the third is that they made a choice not to prevent the harm. And the fourth element is that the prisoner was harmed as a result. So you have to show that they made an intentional decision. They knew about it, they had the power to prevent the harm, and they chose not to. And so that's where it makes it more difficult, because the courts like to say, well, this is mere medical malpractice, which just kills me, because, you know, you hear about the types of things that go on, you know, in medical malpractice cases, which are horrific in and of themselves. And to say that prison medical care providers can commit malpractice on prisoners and that that's not enough for a claim is crazy to me, because these are people that don't have a choice in the healthcare they receive. Sometimes they have to fight very hard to get anything. And so to make it harder for them to sue when they have been wronged seems like the opposite direction. But that is the standard, and that's why it's so difficult to show.
Yeah. And so, Billy, let me throw this at you. So here we are, we have a deliberate indifference standard. We have to show, as Julie and Stacy just stated, we have to show that they have this subjective intent, that they knew, and they have this deliberate intent to not do anything about that. But we're doing that inside of this class action. So what is the level of complexity and the difficulty for the attorneys to show this across the board?
Well, it's very difficult, as Stacy pointed out. It's a high bar. It's not the same as if you were on the outside and suing your doctor for medical malpractice, or to give the example of that most people are familiar with, the prototypical car accident case where, you know, you're trying to show that the other driver was merely negligent in the way they were driving. Maybe they were texting while driving. That's not deliberate indifference. That's just they were negligent. They weren't trying to hurt you. You almost have to show that the prison system or the individual guards or medical providers within the prison intended, it's almost to that level where you have to show that they intended to hurt you, which of course is very hard to show in any case, because the defendants, the prison system, the prison officials can always try to provide an alternative explanation for why they ignored the golf ball sized lump for 3 years before they sent you to a specialist, for example. To give an example, they can always provide an alternative explanation of why they ignored it for so long. Stacy and I are very familiar with this phrase, a mere difference of medical opinion, which comes up in a lot of the court filings. You see in a lot of the court filings where you might have, for example, a prisoner might have been sent to 3 different outside specialists. So they were transported 3 different weeks to 3 different specialists in that area, in that medical area, to get assessments. All 3 of the outside specialists, hypothetically, let's say, agreed with one another that the golf ball sized lump needed to be examined, you know, to give a wild example. And yet there was an in-house provider who's on payroll by the prison system who disagreed with the other 3. And because the one in-house provider disagreed with the 3 outside providers, that's, you know, the lawyers for the prison system can go to court to the judge and say, oh, it was a mere difference of medical opinion. That's not deliberate indifference. Deliberate indifference is, you know, they intended to harm the prisoner, but they didn't intend to. They just had an honest disagreement a professional expert disagreement. And so that's the kind of thing you have to overcome. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd just like to point out that this defense of mere malpractice has been very successful for the department and their contractors for medical care. And so that's, I'm seeing their main defense in this class action of maybe, they even say in their trial brief, we concede that we fell far below the stipulations consistently, but that doesn't mean that it's deliberate indifference. But my point is that when you have a policy of getting right up to that line of between malpractice and deliberate indifference and just trying to keep it right on that side in malpractice, that becomes a policy of deliberate indifference.
Yeah, absolutely. Stacy, you had mentioned something to me earlier too, where you have noticed a lot of times with the courts that that the issue is if it's at risk for serious harm related to that. Can you kind of break that down? What you were saying to us earlier, and what you mean by that?
Yeah, I was reading the defense's trial brief, and they say that the plaintiffs may be able to show that in previous years during this case that there was unconstitutional harm, but that they cannot show that the current care the prisoners are receiving is unconstitutional across the board. But they also state the correct standard, which is it's not that you have to show that the current care that they're getting is unconstitutional. You have to show that the prisoners, the class itself, is at a substantial risk of harm. So if the standard is always going to be this minute, you can't show this minute that they're getting substandard care, you're never going to be able to win. So that's why the defense is trying to cabin the issue to the last slice of time and nothing prior.
Right.
But that's not what the standard is.
Right. That's right. It's a substantial risk. So, and I think that we've seen that. Jimmy, I know that you've been watching the trial every day, but I think that my takeaway from what I've been able to watch and observe is that that is exactly where the defendants have been going in their cross-examination of the plaintiff's witnesses. Is exactly what Stacy's saying. They're trying to nail them down to very specifics, and they're trying to show that it's limited in scope. It's not expansive in scope. Those were the two takeaways that I had. Did you have other takeaways like that, Jimmy?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to say what Stacy said is exactly like what I have seen over the past 4 or 5 years. They used to have these status hearings on this case, and they would show up every month and they would read off the numbers of this 100+ stipulation that they agreed to. And I mean, every year for years, it was always like, okay, past 30 days, we've been killing it. Like, did you guys see July? Wow, awesome numbers. But then it's like, don't look at the past 3 years before that because we didn't do a very good job. So I mean, it's always like, that has always been at the minute level. That's been how they always explain this stuff. So yeah, it kind of makes sense now. And I mean, even tragically, when we heard from Mr. Muhammad, he told us these tales of just tragedy and woe that he has gone through for like 7 years, all bounced all around the Arizona prison system, neglect, abuse, just a total lack of any services whatsoever. And so that foundation was all laid, and the cross-examination was like, okay, but in the past 2 months, when we transferred you to this really great unit, you've been coloring and you've been doing charades, and it's been pretty great, hasn't it? And he's like, well, yes, it has been, but I mean, this, like, were you not around for the past hour where this person talked about how horrible it has been? So yeah, that has been my takeaway as well. It's like, and that's what they always told Judge Duncan and Judge Silver before they were trying to not have this trial happen. It was always like, you have to look at the totality of everything that's happened here. Most of these performance benchmarks are getting better. But again, that was always kind of sketch because to get essentially a passing grade, they had to meet like 85% of what they agreed to. And what they agreed to was already like, the plaintiffs, and I think defense would tell you, a compromise. So it wasn't probably like the best deal possible for the incarcerated people. So, these benchmarks that we're talking about, again, are just, it's the bare minimum. It's the bare minimum. And they're basically saying, well, hey, near past here, we've finally been reaching the bare minimum.
Yeah, and speaking of that, and that's an excellent segue into this question, it kind of goes back full circle, Julie, when we were talking about the Eighth Amendment to the United States Constitution, which there is an analog of that in the Arizona Constitution as well. So it's in the state and federal Constitution, but this is a federal matter. But what Jimmy was just talking about being the bare minimum, those rights in the United States Constitution are the floor of rights that we have in the United States. Is that correct?
Accurate.
Yeah. So as citizens of the United States, when we're talking about the Eighth Amendment right against cruel and unusual punishment, if we find that a state facility has actually manifested a deprivation of those rights, we're talking about the lowest level of rights that we have as citizens in the country. Other laws would be on top of the Constitution. You can't go beyond the Constitution in our legal system. So that in and of itself, I think, needs to land with people too, that we're talking about enormously demonstrable bad conduct on behalf of the state in these cases. Julie, one thing I want to hit on, though, is that it strikes me that all of this has happened since the state of Arizona privatized healthcare. Certainly, I was in the Department of Corrections, as most people that are looking at ATAC know, for 15 years. And I was in the Department of Corrections prior to when we had privatized medical. I was there for the transfer over to privatized medical, and then since we've had privatized medical. And I saw how bad it got in there, and it did get exponentially worse, and it wasn't good to start with. But let's talk about that. Where did privatization come from? Is this something that the Department of Corrections just dreamed up one day they wanted to do, or where did it come from?
Trying to figure out a way to answer this question that's both honest and won't get me a million phone calls just after this.
You want me to take it?
No. I got this. But I mean, my stance on this, and I believe that this is true, not just in Arizona, but nationwide. We have seen moves toward privatization in a host of different states. It's been almost weapons grade here in Arizona. And when you look at who is funding elections, politicians, you continually come back with some of these private prison organizations. It's not just, I think that what interesting part about this trial is for everyone who wants to, vilify private prisons, it's not private prisons, it's private operators inside public prisons. That's as big a grift, if not a bigger grift, than this. And we'll always enforce the lowest common denominator until incarcerated folks have actual real franchise and are able to raise up their voices. This is not an issue that is front of mind for very many people, and it's why this trial is so important and so groundbreaking.
Right. And so, Stacy, let me go ahead and take that to you then. So the reason that we have privatized medical and that we're in this situation now is because the Arizona legislature passed a law that mandated that the Arizona Department of Corrections move to privatized medical. So when that happened, what became DOC's responsibility to govern this privatized medical? What was their obligation in that?
Well, they still have the obligation to oversee their contractors. But they regularly will say, and judges are buying this, that they have no responsibility anymore now that their contractors have been hired. But it was really from a push by the Republican legislature to privatize a lot of things. There was a time when they tried to privatize, have new private prison beds, and this was sold to Arizona's citizens as a way to save money, and they had a measure in there that would make them do a cost comparison between public and private every 2 years, and they never did one. And then when they were forced to look at that fact, they just took that off the books. So they will sell the taxpayers privatization of prisons or healthcare or contractors, whatever, under the guise of saving money. But that's not what it's about. It seems to be more about giving these lucrative contracts to people who will, and companies that will be able to make money off of it, and not be responsible.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Billy, I kind of want to move in a little bit different direction. Jimmy had talked about in this week that we had both men and women that are currently incarcerated in the Department of Corrections testifying, but that we had some people that were not in the Department of Corrections that came in and testified. Craig Haney being one of them, the person that Jimmy had identified at the beginning of the week. Those are expert witnesses. Can you kind of give us what the distinction is between a lay witness and an expert witness, and just kind of a little quick summary about what's required to be an expert witness?
Sure. Well, a fact witness in this example, the most common example are currently incarcerated folks or formerly incarcerated folks. Those are fact witnesses who are allowed to testify. They're allowed to testify only about their personal experiences. What did you perceive? What did you see? What did you hear with your own? What did you perceive with your own five senses? That's a fact witness. An expert witness is permitted to testify only about the things that they, excuse me, it's my cat, are permitted to testify only about the things that they have studied, that they're experts on. They were not there when a person was misdiagnosed. They were not there when a person was denied adequate medical care, but they're reviewing the documents. They're reviewing thousands of pages of records, video footage, surveillance footage, perhaps. They might be doing, in the example, a couple examples that Jimmy mentioned, making tours of the facilities, interviewing prisoners during the last 3-4 months. So they're informed by the personal experiences of others, but they're not testifying about personal experiences. They're testifying about the aggregation of their decades of experience, applying their interviews with prisoners to their professional learning. There's not a clear-cut rule about what makes a person a quote-unquote expert. You don't have to have a PhD. You don't have to have a doctor in front of your name to be considered an expert for court purposes. But you do have to demonstrate to the judge and convince the judge that you have some degree of expertise. An expert could be somebody who has no degrees at all, but who has a wealth of life experience in that given area that you're talking about. A car mechanic could be somebody who could be considered an expert in court on matters of transmissions. Somebody who's had enough lived experience, professional experience in whatever field it might be.
I think there was a famous scene from My Cousin Vinny about that very thing, right? Where he brought in his
perfect example
girlfriend as an expert witness on automotives. Okay, so we do have some questions that are coming in from the audience. I want to make sure I get to those. Excuse me for one second while I'm going through these. Here's a great question, and I'll open this up actually to all four of you. So feel free to answer this in any type roundtable that you want to. One of our viewers is asking, how are the men and women that are in the Department of Corrections that are coming forward to testify? How is ADC protecting these people?
That presupposes that ADC wants to protect them. Yeah, so I'm assuming that that's referring to retaliation for testifying against them. And that's something that I talk to my clients about all the time before we go into court, is that you can't expect to be retaliated against by the guards because they don't appreciate being sued. So I doubt that they are being protected. As a matter of fact, in this case, they had to get an order to prevent the department from retaliating against the prisoners that they were talking to.
Oh, that's incredible.
And I would just add, we tend to a good number of us on this panel are lawyers, but the real heroes, I think, here are the ones testifying. in particular the current prisoners who are testifying by video conference that Jimmy highlighted at the top of the hour. Those are the true heroes, precisely for the reason you point out, John. There can be court orders, there can be admonitions from the judge warning the prison system not to retaliate, but there's no guarantees, and no one knows that better than those who've been in the prison system for a number of years. That any promise or any guarantee is not a guarantee at all. So for that reason, those folks are the true heroes of this week.
Absolutely. Jimmy?
It's actually happened before. Back when Judge Duncan was in charge of the case, there were accusations that incarcerated people who had testified had been rolled up, had their things rolled up like inappropriately and taken away from them, like differently than the way it would normally go for like a prisoner transport. And so he immediately was kind of like jumped on that, and I think they had like an emergency telephonic hearing about it, but there was at least some perceived notion that they had already been retaliated against. And this is back when they were doing status hearings several years ago, so like the stakes weren't as high. So yeah, and then the attorneys have asked all these people if they are, if there's any reason why you would feel scared to testify, or like you shouldn't, or do you feel like you might suffer repercussions? And I think like half of them have basically indicated that they have. But again, are you going to say that when you're surrounded by correctional officers and you're in the camera and there's attorneys in the room with you? I mean, they're probably not going to say, yeah, I'm scared that these people are going to do bad things to me once you turn the camera off. They're probably going to be like, no, everything's fine. Great. Happy to be here. So it's like, we can't really get a good feel for how they are thinking, but it definitely seems like they're certainly at risk.
Yeah, it's truly an issue, and it almost brings me to tears because I've been there. I've been in these facilities obviously for a long time, and I know what these individuals are going through, and I just want to underscore exactly what you all have just said, and Billy, what you said about the courage that it takes to come forward, and when you combine just the courage and the fear of retaliation of being in there, but you couple that with people that many of the witnesses that we've had, and I'm sure many of the witnesses that we'll come to see, are people that do have serious mental illnesses and have some other serious, mental health problems, and those things can often be enormously exacerbating of those underlying conditions of fear of retaliation and all of these things. So it'll bring me to tears thinking about the courage of these people coming forward, and understanding what it takes to do that. But I think that also underscores how bad it really is in the Department of Corrections, that people are willing to set aside their fears and come forward because something has to be done in the Department of Corrections regarding all of these issues. Let's talk just real quickly. There's another question, but I want to talk real quickly, and Julie, I want to bring you back in on this one. This is your Department of Corrections. This is my Department of Corrections. This is Jimmy, Stacy, and Billy's Department of Corrections, right? We own this thing. We're the taxpayers. This is our Department of Corrections. What's the analysis here? What do we see coming from this? I mean, if we have to pretend the future, if we have to look at the future of what we have, if we get a decision that comes down on the plaintiff's side, how do we think that will play out moving forward with the state of Arizona and our government and our lawmakers? Oh, I think you're on mute, Julie.
I'm muted. Got it. I especially actually want to hear from Jimmy on this one, because as I'm watching this play out, it makes me wonder if what we saw this week is in any way tied to what's going on in the Maricopa County jails, and watching, a National Guard get called in. And it makes me wonder if this is hopefully, I mean, the optimistic look would be like, this is the start of a movement for real accountability and transparency. But the real problem is that an institution that is as large as the Department of Corrections is so insulated from any accountability because it's headed by a political appointee who answers only to a governor who is not holding press conferences and doesn't seem inclined to answer to the people on this. It makes me wonder if other public officials who are similarly situated are starting to see writing on the wall that they might be held accountable. And I think that's one of the interesting levers for change. And it makes me wonder if that's part of the calculus of what's happening in the jails as well.
Jimmy, did you want to chime in on that?
So I think the question was, what do we think is going to be one of the potential outcomes, or
Yeah, as far as public policy goes with our lawmakers, yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, I don't know. I feel like Judge Silver is probably going to appoint some sort of receiver or some sort of position where she is in direct control of the Department of Corrections. But, is that really going to lead to any systemic or policy changes? I don't know, because it's just kind of like the Department of Corrections has been fighting this for years and years and appealing it as much as they can. And so I imagine whatever Judge Silver does, they're going to appeal that as high as they can. And then, so I don't know. I don't know if we're going to see any real direct consequences that would compel anyone to change anything until, if it happens, she is like in direct power and she's ordering the doubling of the healthcare staff, and we get smacked with like the doubling of our healthcare costs. Maybe at that point that would trigger some sort of change or policy changes. But I think maybe what's happening with, I'm doing some reporting on the DOJ investigation into Phoenix police too. And what a lot of organizers I'm talking with about that are worried about is that with the oversight of the federal government or with federal government involvement, maybe could become kind of like a lax attitude. Like, the feds are here, they're going to take care of everything. I wonder if somehow, at some point, DOC and everyone else will be like, well, okay, it's in the federal court's hands now. So, but I just don't know. I don't really see it leading to any significant change at this point. And I haven't really heard any other potentials for outcomes other than like serious fines. But like you said at the top, John, they've been hit with a couple $1 million fines a few times. The healthcare contract is $216 million annually, though. So, I mean, I think it would take a massive increase by Judge Silver in the type of sanctions to change anything.
Yeah. I did talk to some lawmakers recently, and they expressed a lot of frustration. And these were, lawmakers that I don't think normally would be predisposed to looking at a prison conditions as this, but they were pretty frustrated too with the fact that we, as citizens of Arizona, are having to sue ourselves to get the Department of Corrections to operate effectively. And I think that this is starting to land as an idea with non-traditional people that are not traditionally disposed to some of these arguments and some of these issues. I think it's really starting to open up, some eyes on this. But hope springs eternal when you're in a nonprofit organization that's out there doing this kind of work.
If you want to take the pessimistic view, there's two other long-running lawsuits. If you're ever at a trivia night and you're ever asked the question, "What's the longest-running civil lawsuit in Arizona history?" I think the answer is a case called Graves, which is a long-standing lawsuit against the Maricopa County
right.
Pretrial detention system, jail system, which I think was initiated in the year 1977.
Yep.
I was not born yet. I think many of us on this panel were not. And it's still, to my knowledge, still ongoing. It's a lawsuit that involves remarkably similar issues, just a different setting, the jail system instead of the prison system, involving mental health and other types of care to pretrial detainees. And the other lawsuit is a case called Arnold, which is now resolved, but was running for about 40 years from the 1980s through the Jan Brewer administration, involving the state mental health care system. So we're about 10 years into this lawsuit. Hopefully it doesn't take 40 years as it has for Graves and the Arnold case.
Billy, I just learned that there is a 40-year-long consent decree about New Mexico prisons that's ongoing. Mm-hmm. I was doing some reporting about what happened with some correctional officer behavior, and they had a similar thing happen in New Mexico. I called the law firm that was in charge of it. And, they've had people come and go, retire. I mean, it was like, so yeah, there are, and that one again is a prison specific consent decree, which isn't even, so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, they had some real problems in New Mexico as well. But of course, we see that across the country. Um, so, so here we are. So, what do we expect moving forward in the next couple of weeks? So let's just go around the horn. What do we expect to see, and what would we like to see moving forward? Julie, we can go and start with you.
Sure. I mean, my biggest concern listening over the last week, and I did miss a few key witnesses, but what I did pick up on in trying to read the tea leaves is that there's still skepticism with respect to how the experts are calculating what staffing looks like. And that's just like a big red flag for me, because one of the ways you get to deliberate indifference is being able to prove, systemically understaffed facilities. So I would hope to hear more testimony on that would allay the judge's concerns. I'd expect to hear from more incarcerated people. I'm dying to hear who on earth is going to get up in defense and defend this system, especially when the defense seems to be that this is only isolated instances. So that's what I'm looking for, and that's kind of what I'm expecting.
Jimmy, do you know what we got coming up this week?
I know one of the incarcerated defendants next week. I've communicated with him quite a bit, wrote a few stories about him. We featured him in our recent story with the Marshall Project. His name's Dustin Brislin, and someone who has experienced mental health problems his whole life. He told me one time that if he felt like he had access to mental health care when he was younger, he never would have ended up in prison. He's been in prison for some time, been at various different units. He struggles with self-harm. He's experienced self-harm incidents quite a bit. And he's also he's very cognizant of what he's going through, what he feels. And he is actually someone who can really explain really well the challenges that he faced, why he takes those actions, and why this is happening, because he's being failed by the healthcare system. And several times he's told me that, when he can get on the right medication, he's doing great. He's a great artist. He's drawing a lot of things, sends me some pictures that he's drawn. Really talented person. Other times, though, the medicine that he was giving him relief, he doesn't have access to. It will be taken off the formulary sometimes, which is an issue that they've been talking about quite a bit, where Centurion and Horizon before them and Wexford before them, they would all only agree to prescribe certain medications, and a lot of people have accused them of doing that because they don't want to put formulary medicines on there that cost more money. So anyway, I think he'll be testifying about a lot of those issues. Be interesting to hear him speak. Also, for anyone who is a DOC watcher out there like me, Director Shin is going to testify. That I think is happening. He is listed as a defendant witness, so that could happen sometime next week or the week after. But I have never had the opportunity to be at a press conference with Director Shin or ask direct questions. I think I had a chance to speak with him when he first got hired on. I may be misremembering that, right? But so I will be interested to see the questions that he has asked and the way that he has responded. Previously when he's been asked about things at the department, he famously said that, the Arizona prisons were the safest place to be during the pandemic. He kind of has doubled down on statements like that. So just be interested to see what his take on all this is. Like, I can't imagine actually being Director Shin coming into the state, inheriting all these problems. I mean, it's really quite a system to take on in the first place. But at least in his interactions with me and the press, and his administrative presence with the press has not been great. They've shut down communication channels, made it harder for me to call and interview people. So for me, this has been a really great opportunity to get the firsthand testimonials from these people that I've kind of been shut off from. Be interested to hear from them, the administration, and just be interested to kind of keep observing, seeing how Judge Silver is reacting to a lot of this. She's a really tough arbiter, really keeping everything in check. has, very precise questions for everyone, and has just been very thorough, and, hasn't really shown her hand other than to just be a very thorough arbiter of this whole process. So it'll be interesting to just kind of keep watching her. I do believe that she has been probably profoundly impacted by the incarcerated people that testified, as I think we all have. So,
yeah. Stacy and Billy, I'll throw this to both of you. What would you like to see coming up in the next couple of weeks in this trial?
Yeah, it's tough to say. I guess I'll be really curious to see David Shin's testimony as well, because in the defense's trial brief, one of the points that they bring up is that they've changed contractors and they've changed leadership. And folks may not remember, but the former director, Charles Ryan, actually resigned amidst a scandal about broken locks. So it wasn't the choice to replace him because of the failure of healthcare. And I believe that he was handpicked to be Charles Ryan's successor in, both the position and the political, the political perspective that our governor wants in a prison director. And I think that is a policy of deliberate indifference. So it'll be interesting because Shin has been so reclusive and so unavailable for his opinions on what's going on. So, I'm looking forward to that.
Billy?
I mean, I would echo what Julie and I think Jimmy expressed, which is, more stories. I think storytelling is incredibly powerful. And, we owe a lot to reporters like Jimmy and others who have been telling this story for a long time. Ultimately, judges can do what judges can do. But as Stephen Breyer, the Supreme Court justice, has said, courts don't have armies to enforce their orders. And it's become incredibly clear that the Arizona prison system does not want to comply with order after order. They've been held in contempt twice now, I believe. And that's with, in my opinion, a very cautious and generous judge, that it's only been twice, not more. And the point being that courts can only do so much. At the end of the day, it's the legislature that's going to have to do a lot of the reform in the years to come. And reform at the legislative level can only happen if their constituents demand it. Constituents can only demand it if the constituents know what's happening, and constituents can only know what's happening if there's good storytelling. So I'm looking forward to a lot more stories, and those stories getting broadcast broadly and widely in the weeks to come.
Absolutely. And you couldn't have teed me up better for the closeout, Billy. So thank you so much. So that is what we do. What Billy was just talking about here at ATAC is that we are an organization that is working very hard to educate both the public, to educate lawmakers, to educate stakeholders on the need for comprehensive, independent, external oversight of the Department of Corrections. Today, we've only been talking about issues related to medical and related to solitary confinement and related to mental health care. But those are just one area in one sector of the Department of Corrections, and we have a Department of Corrections that is systemically failing almost in every metric. We've had escapes, we've had riots, we've had all of this stuff with the Parson Shin trial. We have staff members that are working under very difficult conditions, and it's caused massive amounts of staff attrition. We have very low staffing levels. That is coming part into this trial as well. But all of those things have an external effect. And so what we have seen, again, based on Jimmy's reporting quite a bit, is what we have seen is that these problems are manifesting not only in those negative outcomes that I talked about, like escapes and riots and bad medical people dying unnecessarily and tragically and very painfully in the Department of Corrections, but moreover, we're seeing that manifest where people are not being released from the Department of Corrections when they should. So they're being held in these conditions even longer than they should be, that they've been sentenced to by the courts. And so when we're talking about law and order doesn't mean just putting somebody that committed a crime in the Department of Corrections. Law and order also means that we need to have an effective government. We need to have an effective Department of Corrections, and we need to have accountability and transparency there. And that's what we are in business for with ATAC, is trying to get legislation passed. We will have legislation up again this cycle, and we encourage all of you to please engage with us at ATAC, and please engage with your lawmakers. Like Billy was just saying, we need to continue to tell those stories. We need to continue to avail ourselves to our lawmakers and continue to tell them that this is our Department of Corrections. And when I say that, what I mean is that every dollar that you make as a wage earner in Arizona, every dollar that you spend as a consumer in Arizona, some portion of that is going to fund the Department of Corrections. So everything that we all do is funding this department, and it's at a $1.3 billion. We are spending more on the Department of Corrections, about $400 million more than we spend on colleges and universities combined. So we have a massive disparity in Arizona with our Department of Corrections and with our criminal legal system writ large that we need to have fixed. And we are solely focused on that here at ATAC as it relates to the Department of Corrections. I strongly encourage everybody to visit our website. That's at aztracco.com, aztracco.com. And you can visit our website. You can see the legislation, you can see our proposals, and you can see the work that we're doing. And many of these news stories that Jimmy has reported on, and some of the other reporters here in Arizona have reported on. We will be back again next Friday with this esteemed panel to discuss next week's events, and then the next Friday after that. And so we will continue this series. We love that you are sending in your questions. We really appreciate that, and we appreciate the support. I also want to announce that on Saturday, the 13th of November, so a week from this Saturday, ATAC is having its first annual fundraiser picnic in the park at Margaret T. Hance Park in downtown Phoenix. Please come by. We have scheduled Representative Diego Rodriguez will be there, and he will be speaking. Candidate Brian Radford out of Pinal County will be there, and he will be speaking. And we have some other guests that will be there and speaking as well once we get confirmations from them. And so that'll be from 12 o'clock to 2 o'clock at Margaret T. Hance Park on the west side of the park. Moreover, we have additional panels coming up on the 23rd of November. We have a panel with two former correctional officers that spent a combined total of about 50 years in the Department of Corrections between the two of them, who have extensive knowledge, experience, and in the Department of Corrections, that are going to come and talk about the need from their perspective. And their perspective is as strong as many of the formerly incarcerated and families' perspective. That's a thing with the Department of Corrections right now, is that it's not just inmates that are asking for reform, it's everybody's asking for reform. There's just a small cabal of people that are holding back reform, and that's why we need your voice on this issue right now. We will also have a panel in December with two lawmakers as well. Representative Walter Blackman and Representative, again, Diego Rodriguez will be on a panel in December, on December 14th, that we will host, and we will talk about that as we're moving into the upcoming legislative cycle. I want to thank all of you for joining us tonight, and I want to especially thank the esteemed panel that we've had tonight. Julie, Jimmy, Stacy, Billy, you guys are amazing. Thank you so much for coming out and explaining some of this to us, and we will see you all next week.